Hello and welcome to this special Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful episode looking at COP27, which is a major environmental conference that is coming up later this year. And to go through this, we're talking to two people who not only are going to this year's COP27 conference in Egypt, they were also at COP26 last year in Glasgow. We have got Emer Rafferty, who is a delegate going with the Foundation for Environmental Education as a young reporter. And we have Rosalind Skillen, who's also going to COP27 as a youth delegate. Emer and Rosalind, you're both very welcome to this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Good to be with you. Rosalind, I'm going to start with you first of all. What does a delegate actually do at COP? Who's there? What do you go and see? Who do you listen to?
Yeah, so it's a good question because in some ways COP can be really overwhelming. It's a really big conference and there's so much happening. So sometimes it feels very difficult to structure your time. But usually what a youth delegate does is visit all the different pavilions, talk to organisations, and also try and organise meetings with different ministers, some of the negotiators, really to put pressure on and to talk about the issues that are most important and pertinent to them. But it's really up to the youth delegates as to how they want to structure their time and what would be the most meaningful. As well, each of the days has a different theme that they're looking to tackle, so people can go along to workshops which are talking about interesting topics, and also network and meet interesting people, and try and think of different ways that we can collaborate and connect in the sector and move the agenda forward.
Brilliant. And Emer, just for you as well, because I know you're a regular attender at these events as well. What is it for you that takes you along to COP, and what does someone like you do?
Yeah, well, I suppose the overall thing is to really represent the views of, I suppose, for us, the younger generation, but also for the global south and people all across the world, and really demanding that their voices be heard just more than anyone else. So yeah, I think that's overall what our aim is, to ensure that we're listened to and that we ask the tough questions that need to be asked.
Yeah, and obviously, Rosalind, you were talking there about, obviously there are major decision makers there. There are government ministers, there are presidents, there are prime ministers, there are major companies that are very much part of the climate change debate there as well. What is it you're hoping to get from COP27 this year? I mean, what will you judge this event as a success?
Yeah, thanks, David, because it's really important to consider, because COP26 last year was hosted by the UK, so the focus was a lot more on like the decarbonisation agenda. Many people might have been familiar with that phrase, like keeping 1.5 alive, the idea that we can't have rising temperatures breaching the limit of 1.5 degrees. But this year, COP27 is happening in Egypt. It's an African COP, and the focus is going to be a lot more on climate justice, climate finance, adaptation, and really implementation of some of the pledges that were made at COP26. So hopefully for me, I'll judge the success of this COP based on commitments from high-income countries like the UK and Ireland, wealthy nations really delivering on their climate finance commitments. Because back in 2009 in Copenhagen, rich nations promised 100 billion a year to low-income countries worst affected by the climate change. They're 2 years overdue in delivering that money, and it still hasn't been seen. So really, we do need to see climate finance being a priority issue at this year's COP.
Brilliant. And Emer, same question to you. What is it you're going to be judging whether this COP has been a success or failure by?
I'm the same as Rosalind. It was quite easy last year for countries in this part of the world because it was more focused on the decarbonisation and things that sometimes countries around us would feel that's more relevant to. But it's just as important for countries in this part of the world to realise that we have a role as well in climate finance, in helping the global south, and creating that climate justice that is so important. So yeah, that's a big part of this COP, and that's what I'd be looking for. In terms of COP26, there was outcomes from it in terms of commitments, but again, as Rosalind, we can't tell how successful it is until the commitments are implemented.
Yeah, and you're leading very nicely on to my next question there, Emer. Obviously, the two of you were at COP26 in Glasgow last year. We all remember a big hullabaloo about it, and we all remember we even did our own campaign here in Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. And I know the two of you were over there as well. You took control of our social media for a few days whilst you were at it. Rosalind, just on COP26, first of all, what was the experience like of actually being there, actually seeing some of the things that were going on? And also, what have you made of some of the progress or maybe lack thereof that has happened since it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool to be in a space where you have so many different worlds colliding, if this makes sense. It's very rare that you get civil society activists, NGOs, being able to hold conversation with policymakers and negotiators and heads of state. And I think that is one of the best things about COP, in the sense that it facilitates that conversation. In terms of outcomes from COP26, I guess the real heavy lifting after a COP is, when the conference finishes, as Emer said, at the end of the day, COP itself doesn't reduce carbon emissions. It's just 2 weeks of talking, really. So it's the action that follows and the implementation that's really important. And I've been really disappointed by the UK government in particular over the last few weeks, and some of the really devastating environmental decisions that have been part of the Truss premiership in particular, lifting that ban on fracking, issuing nearly 130 new licenses for oil and gas exploration, when at COP26 it was really, really clear that we need to move away from oil and gas and towards a more just transition and towards renewables. And I think in some ways, it's difficult to judge the outcomes of COP26 because obviously the war against Ukraine has opened up a whole new conversation on energy. And that would actually be one of my fears then going forward into COP27, that we're going to see climate not as a priority issue, because there's so many other things happening, like food insecurity, cost of living, energy crisis, also important. But I would really encourage people to see climate as the lens through which all these things interact. And I think if we see things in a more holistic, intersectional way going forward, it will be so much easier then to deliver on the real outcomes for climate justice.
Okay, and Emer, same question to you in terms of, I know you were alluding a wee bit to it in your previous answer, but in terms of COP26, just that, what's it like being there? Because loads of us will watch COP from afar and won't actually know. So what was it like being there in Glasgow? But also then, obviously, it's only been a year, but again, what have you made of some of the policies and proposals that have come from it since?
Yeah, well, it's being there. You had the green zone and the blue zone. Green zone was open to anybody, and there was a lot of art there. There was a lot of creativity and young people, and it wasn't any big discussions going on there. There was the conversations and about different topics if you wanted to go to them. So I found that part, to be honest, a wee bit underwhelming. And then the blue zone, obviously that's where the conversations go on. And it was, to be honest, quite exciting to be there. And seeing these people and going up and ask them these questions. But in terms of the outcomes of it, there was a few good promises. They promised to stop deforestation by 2030. 100 countries promised to do that. About 100 countries promised to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And richer countries promised to double funding for adaptation by 2040. So all relatively good promises. However, as Rosalind mentioned, nothing has followed. There's talk of new oil fields in the North Sea, like Rosebank, and if that goes ahead, it'll produce more carbon emissions than the poorest 28 countries in the world. So, we need to really look at those things of what's going on today and what this government is actually doing. And so them calling themselves climate leaders a year ago has no credibility anymore. So hopefully this year we will, I don't know how many chances we can give for them to redeem themselves, but they're running out.
Just to add to that as well, Emer, because we kind of forget that the UK is still holding the COP presidency until Egypt. Technically, they're still holding the presidency until November, until 2 weeks' time. So I think in that light as well, it's really disappointing.
Okay, and the two of you have highlighted some of the main environmental policy problems that we still have. My last question to you both is, because, there may be some people watching this and they may be thinking, why, if you're kind of a person at your age group, you're just starting out in your career, you're finishing up your studies and so on and so forth. I mean, Emer, sorry, I'll start that again because I rambled. Sorry, Gary. So my final question to you both is, obviously you're just starting your careers, you're finishing up your studies. This is now the second COP that you've been to. And I want to ask you, Rosalind, this. Would you recommend that someone at your stage of your life and career, would you recommend that they go to COP? Is it really an engaging place? If you're an environmental activist and you want to learn more and you want to become more engaged, is COP a useful venue for that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. I want to caveat that by saying, I don't think that just going to conferences is the most important thing. I think it's a part of the work that me and Emer do, and it's really important, and it enables us to talk to a lot of decision makers. But I think a lot of the grassroots community-led stuff is equally important and valuable. But I do think that it's a really, really interesting space. And I mean, it's once a year where you're getting countries from all over the world come together to deliver meaningful outcomes, hopefully. And yeah, no, I think being involved in the climate space as a young person is one of the best things. And for me, it brings me so much joy and so much friendship, with people like Emer. And yeah, I really, really enjoy it.
Right. Emer, same question to you.
Yeah, of course, I would recommend anybody to get involved. And as Rosalind said, whether it be to go to a conference, which doesn't happen too often, or get involved in an organization, no matter what you're doing, as long as you're doing something. So if you're at COP or if you're not, if you're still being active, that's the main thing. In terms of being a COP, I find that it can be quite hard to talk about these things if you're not there. So for example, if I wasn't a COP last year, the media coverage of it that I would have seen, I feel like I wouldn't have got a good enough idea of it. So I think being there really gets you a better insight of what actually it is like and what goes on, and then you're able to talk more easily about it. But at the end of the day, it's a conference for 2 weeks, and what are you doing the rest of the year? That's the other question we need to be asking. And me and Rosalind are definitely working hard the other parts of the year. It's not all just about showing up to the conference.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your work. We'll be sharing across our social media feeds some of the activities that you're doing and some of the events that you're at. So have a great time at COP27, and thank you very much for taking part in this episode.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.